Shalom Aleichem Rabotai. We are continuing the Mishnah Yomi with Kilayim, with the fifth parak of Kilayim at the fourth Mishnah. Geffen shehi v'gat ovaneka, a grapevine that itself is planted in the gat, the wine press area. If you recall from yesterday's Mishnayot, they had a lowered area on the edge of the vineyard where they would do the pressing. And a person, if it was the minimum size, then a person was allowed to plant other species there. But in this case, there's actually grapes there, or they're planted in a neka. A neka is a cleft, like a ditch cut into the ground or into the side of the ground. Years ago, I saw an article about the grape growing in Afghanistan, and they were actually growing grapes in these nekayim, in these ditches that then had a cleft cut into the side of the ditch, and they had been built by the soldiers of Alexander the Great, who is mentioned in the Mishnah that he conquered the Middle East, went through Eretz Yisrael, met the Kohen Gadol in the temple, and he ended up getting to Afghanistan, and they needed grapes, they needed wine. They built these ditches in such an arrangement that it would maximize the sunlight, but minimize the dehydration effect from the dry air there. So the grapes were sort of quasi-underground with the sunlight coming in, but they were sort of growing out of the side wall of these ditches there. So it's quite an amazing feat of engineering, of cultivation. But that could be, the neka could be man-made or it could be artificial. Notnin la'avdata, you have to give it its workspace. So here, since the vine is not really in the vineyard, its workspace is only 6 tefachim. And you can sow with other crops the other remainder of the area. Rabbi Yossi Omer im ein sham arba amot. Yossi says if there's not an arba amot space there, levi zer l'sham. He says it doesn't need just 6 tefachim. You can't bring any other crops there if you don't have arba amot away. Habayit shebekerem, a house that's within the vineyard. Maybe it would have a shack for the guard, or it'd be nice to have a nice getaway house in your vineyard. Zoin betocha, you could have other species inside your house. A house is defined as, I believe, 4x4 amot. So it's not just a little shack. It's a space that is usable. Since it has walls, it is separated from the rest of the vineyard. Mishnah Hey, Hanoteya Yorek Bekerem Omekayim. This is a vital Mishnah. Someone who plants a vegetable in his vineyard, or he's Mekayem. He lets it go. He sees it there, and he says, oh, great, there's some vegetables there. He wants them there, even though they were planted by accident or the wind blew the seeds in. But once he wants it there, it has the same din as planting it on purpose. Pentikdash, pentugadesh, he's going to have to rip it out and burn it, and burn the vines around it. It's Hasar Behana, as we learned in this Mishnah. Reze mekodesh arbaim v'chamish gefonim. This will be Mekadesh, not in a good sense of Mekadesh, but Pentugadesh sense, that he has to burn them there. Asr Behana, 45 vines. Matai, when does it get 45? Bisman Shachayun Nituot al Arba, or al Chamesh, when the vines are spaced 4 amot apart from one another, or 5 amot apart from one another. There's a big discussion here in the Bartanura. He says, really, if they're 5 amot apart, it shouldn't zap 45. It should only zap about 37. He has an arichas here about the math, but it seems what happened was, according to Tosfot Yontiv and others, that the normal spacing was 4 amot, and 5 amot looks very similar to 4 amot. They're still tightly spaced, so if someone didn't take out 45 vines, it wouldn't look like they had done the job of removing the kilayim from their field and removing what's asr from hana. It wouldn't look right. So even if they're 5 amot apart, since it looks very similar to 4 amot apart, they still require the removal of 45 vines. Mishnah continues, Hayu netuot al shesh o al sheva. If the spacing between the vine plants was 6 amot between each, or 7 amot between each, so it wipes out 16 amot in every direction. Now that was the same din if it was 4 or 5 amot apart. If it's 4 amot apart and you draw a circle with a 16 amot radius, then it zaps 45 vines. So now it's telling you really that's the din. The normal case was the vineyard was 45 apart, and the Mishnah ends agulot lo merubaot. This is a circle, like a galah, like a wagon, a wheel, a circle of a lumarbal. It's not a square, so it doesn't have those corners of the square. It's a circle with a 16 amma radius. And it's interesting the Mishnah doesn't mention 8 amot, because that was a machlokis at the end of the last parak. If the vines are 8 amot apart from one another, they might not even be considered a vineyard. And then it wouldn't have this din of pentu kadesh, that they become nikodesh, they become aser behana if they are planted, or the kilayim is allowed to grow there with the ratzon, with the will of the owner. Shkoyach Rebbeinu.